In the year 1300, almost nobody would have looked at a small Turkish principality on the edge of the Byzantine world and predicted what was coming. Yet from this obscure frontier state would emerge an empire that would eventually rule Constantinople, dominate much of the Middle East, control large parts of southeastern Europe and North Africa, and survive for more than 6 centuries. The Ottoman Empire did not begin as an empire. It began in the wreckage of other people's worlds. For centuries, Anatolia, modern Turkey, had been contested by the Byzantine Empire and different Muslim powers. Then in 1071, the Battle of Manzikert dramatically weakened Byzantine control over much of the interior. Turkish-speaking groups moved increasingly into Anatolia. Among them were the Seljuk Turks, whose Sultanate of Rum became a major regional power. But then something much larger arrived from the east: the Mongols. In 1243, Mongol forces defeated the Seljuks at the Battle of Kosa Dağ. Seljuk authority weakened, and Anatolia fragmented into numerous Turkish principalities known as beyliks. One of them was ruled by a man named Osman. This is where certainty becomes difficult. The earliest decades of Ottoman history are poorly documented. Most surviving Ottoman narratives were written generations after Osman's lifetime, when his descendants already ruled a powerful state. That means legend and history are difficult to separate. What we can say is that Osman operated on a remarkably valuable frontier. To his east were competing Turkish principalities, to his west were weakened Byzantine territories, and that borderland created opportunity. Warriors could gain land and wealth through raids and conquest. Muslim fighters, tribal groups, local Christians, converts, and political opportunists could all become part of shifting frontier coalitions. The early Ottoman state was probably far less uniform than later imperial mythology suggested, and Osman was good at exploiting that world. His followers gradually expanded into Byzantine territory in northwestern Anatolia. Fortresses fell, villages changed hands, local alliances mattered as much as battles, and every successful conquest gave Osman something essential: more land, more followers, and more prestige. Around 1302, Ottoman forces defeated a Byzantine army near Baphius. It was not one of history's largest battles, but it revealed something important. This small frontier principality was becoming dangerous. Osman's name would eventually give the dynasty its identity. Osmanlı, the House of Osman, Ottoman. But he would not live to see the transformation that followed. His son Orhan inherited a growing state and pushed deeper into Byzantine territory. In 1326, Bursa fell. It became the Ottomans' first major urban center and an early capital. Now the dynasty possessed more than frontier warriors. It had a city, markets, tax revenues, religious institutions, administrative structures. The machinery of a state was beginning to form. Then the Ottomans encountered an opportunity that would change everything. Across the narrow waters from Anatolia lay Europe, and the Byzantine Empire was tearing itself apart through civil war. Ottoman soldiers were invited across the straits as allies and mercenaries. They came to help fight someone else's war. But once they established themselves on the European side, they did not simply leave. In 1354, an earthquake badly damaged the Byzantine fortress of Gallipoli. Ottoman forces occupied the area. Suddenly, the dynasty possessed a permanent foothold in Europe. That changed the scale of the story. The Balkans contained divided kingdoms, rival nobles, and weakened Byzantine territories. The Ottomans moved into that fractured political landscape with extraordinary speed. This is the part of their rise that is easy to misunderstand. They did not simply sweep westward because they possessed an unstoppable army. They advanced because they combined warfare with diplomacy, marriages, tributary relationships, local alliances, and the ability to incorporate conquered elites. They were learning something that every durable empire eventually learns. Conquest is only the beginning. You have to make conquered territory governable. Within a few generations, the obscure principality founded by Osman was becoming one of the strongest states in the Balkans. But one city remained outside its grasp. A city that had been the capital of the Roman world in the East for nearly 1,000 years, Constantinople. The Ottomans could surround it, They could weaken it, they could take almost everything around it. But taking the city itself would require something different. And eventually it would require a 21-year-old sultan who believed that the impossible was simply a problem waiting to be solved. Before the Ottomans could conquer Constantinople, they nearly disappeared. By the late 14th century, Ottoman expansion had transformed the Balkans. Under Murad I, Ottoman forces pushed deeper into southeastern Europe. In 1389, they fought a major coalition at the Battle of Kosovo. Both sides suffered heavily. Murad himself was killed, but the Ottoman state survived the battle and continued expanding. His successor, Bayezid I, moved aggressively. Bayezid strengthened Ottoman control in Anatolia and the Balkans, and placed Constantinople under intense pressure. In 1396, a major crusading army attempted to stop him at Nicopolis. Then another conqueror appeared from the east. In 1402, his forces confronted Bayezid near Ankara. The Ottoman army was defeated. Bayezid was captured. He died the following year. And suddenly, the empire he had expanded so quickly began tearing itself apart. Bayezid's sons fought one another for the throne. For more than a decade, the Ottoman state existed in civil war during a period known as the Interregnum. In 1413, Mehmed I emerged victorious and reunited the state. His son Murad II continued rebuilding Ottoman power. The dynasty had survived its most dangerous internal collapse, and that survival changed it. The Ottomans became increasingly sophisticated at managing succession, administration, and military power. One institution became particularly important: the Janissaries. Their origins were connected to the dev-shurma system, through which Christian boys from parts of the Balkans were periodically taken into Ottoman service, converted to Islam, and trained for positions in the military or administration. Some entered the elite infantry corps known as the Janissaries. Others could rise extraordinarily high within the imperial government. To modernize, the system contains a disturbing contradiction. Children were removed from Christian families through coercive state recruitment. Yet within the Ottoman system, some of those recruits could eventually become among the most powerful men in the empire. The Janissaries became closely tied to the Sultan. They were disciplined, professional, and increasingly influential. But military organization alone does not explain Ottoman survival. The empire learned to rule diversity: Muslims, Orthodox Christians, Armenians, Jews, different languages, different legal traditions, different local elites. Ottoman government was never a modern system of religious equality. Muslims held privileged status. Non-Muslims faced specific taxes and restrictions that changed across time and place. But the empire often preferred controlled accommodation to forced uniformity. That pragmatism helped it govern territories containing populations far larger and more diverse than the original Ottoman frontier community. By the middle of the 15th century, one enormous prize remained: Constantinople. Once the greatest city of the Mediterranean world, it had declined dramatically from its ancient peak. The Fourth Crusade had captured and brutally sacked it in 1204. The Byzantines recovered the city in 1261, but the empire never fully recovered its former strength. By the 1400s, Byzantine territory had become a shadow of what it once was. Constantinople was still magnificent, still symbolic, still strategically crucial, but much of the land around it was already Ottoman. Then, in 1451, Murad II died. His 19-year-old son became Sultan, Mehmed II. Many underestimated him. That would not last long. Mehmed understood that Constantinople was more than a city. It controlled the passage between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. It stood between Ottoman territories in Europe and Asia. And as long as the Byzantine capital survived at the center of his domains, the Ottoman conquest remained incomplete. So Mehmed began preparing. He constructed the fortress of Rumeli Hisari on the Bosporus, tightening control over maritime traffic. He gathered ships, soldiers, engineers, and artillery. Among those who came to his court was a cannon founder usually identified as Orban or Urban. He helped construct enormous bombards capable of firing stone projectiles against Constantinople's legendary walls. Those walls had protected the city for roughly 1,000 years. Armies had come before them and failed. Mehmed knew that simply repeating earlier sieges would produce the same result, so he prepared to attack Constantinople by land, by sea, and with weapons on a scale its defenders had never faced. In April 1453, the Ottoman army arrived. Inside the walls, Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI prepared for what might be the final siege in Roman history. The defenders were badly outnumbered, but they had survived impossible situations before. And between Mehmed and the city stood one of the greatest defensive systems ever built, the Theodosian walls. For centuries, they had stopped almost everyone. Now the cannons began to fire. On April 6, 1453, the siege of Constantinople began. For Mehmed II, failure would be more than a military defeat. He was a young sultan attacking one of the most famous cities on earth. If he failed, enemies inside and outside the Ottoman court could question whether he deserved the throne. Across the walls stood Constantine XI. He commanded only a fraction of Mehmed's manpower, reinforced by foreign volunteers, including experienced Genoese fighters under Giovanni Giustiniani. But Constantinople possessed something more valuable than numbers: the Theodosian walls. Layers of defensive walls, towers, and ditches had protected the city for centuries. Mehmed intended to break them with artillery. His enormous bombards fired stone projectiles into the defenses. The effect must have been terrifying. Smoke, noise, stone exploding from walls that had outlived entire empires. But the great cannons had weaknesses. They were slow to reload, difficult to move, and the defenders repaired damaged sections whenever they could. Constantinople was not collapsing quickly enough. Then there was the sea. A massive chain stretched across the entrance to the Golden Horn, preventing the Ottoman fleet from simply sailing into the protected harbor. Mehmed needed another solution, so he did something extraordinary. He moved ships over land. Ottoman crews transported vessels across greased wooden tracks behind the hills of Galata and lowered them into the Golden Horn beyond the chain. The Byzantines woke to discover Ottoman ships inside waters they had believed protected. Now they had to defend more of the city. Still, Constantinople held. Weeks passed. Ottoman casualties mounted. Rumors circulated that a relief fleet might arrive from the west. Mehmed faced a dangerous calculation. Every additional day increased the possibility that the siege could fail. Then came the final assault. During the night of May 28th into May 29th, Ottoman forces prepared for a massive attack. Waves of soldiers struck the defenses. The fighting continued for hours. Then Giustiniani was badly wounded and withdrew from the walls. His departure damaged the defenders' morale at the worst possible moment. Ottoman troops broke through. Constantine XI disappeared in the fighting. His body was never identified with certainty. And on May 29, 1453, Constantinople fell. The Byzantine Empire was finished. But describing this simply as the fall of Constantinople misses what Mehmed believed had happened. He did not see himself merely as the man who destroyed the Roman Empire. He intended to inherit it. The 21-year-old conqueror entered the city and made Constantinople the center of his own imperial project. Hagia Sophia, built nearly 9 centuries earlier under Emperor Justinian, was converted into a mosque. At the same time, Mehmed needed something more difficult than conquest: people. The city had suffered centuries of population decline, war, and economic disruption. An empty capital was useless. So Mehmed encouraged and compelled populations from different parts of his domains to settle there. Muslims, Greek Orthodox Christians, Armenians, Jews, merchants, craftsmen, officials. Constantinople began growing again as an Ottoman capital. Mehmed also allowed the Orthodox Patriarchate to continue functioning under Ottoman authority. This was not modern religious tolerance. It was imperial pragmatism. A diverse population could be easier to govern when communities retained institutions through which the state could communicate, tax, and administer them. And Mehmed's ambitions extended far beyond Constantinople. He took the title Kayseri Rum, Caesar of Rome. To him, conquering the Roman capital gave him a claim to Roman imperial legitimacy. He continued expanding through the Balkans and Anatolia, Serbia, Bosnia, the Morea, the remaining Byzantine successor state at Trebizond. Ottoman armies even landed in southern Italy at Otranto in 1480. For a moment, the possibility of further expansion into Italy did not seem impossible. Then Mehmed died in 1481. He had transformed the Ottoman state. The dynasty that began on a frontier now controlled one of the most strategically important cities in the world. But Constantinople was only the beginning, because the empire's greatest expansion was still ahead. Within decades, Ottoman armies would defeat rival Muslim powers, take control of Syria and Egypt, challenge the Habsburgs in Europe and dominate much of the eastern Mediterranean. And eventually, one sultan would push Ottoman power further than anyone before him. In Europe, they would call him Suleiman the Magnificent. To his own subjects, he would be remembered by another name, Kanuni, the lawgiver. And under him, the Ottoman Empire would enter its golden age. In 1520, a 26-year-old sultan inherited the Ottoman throne. His name was Suleiman. By the time he died, Europeans would call him the Magnificent. Ottoman tradition remembered him as Kanuni, the lawgiver. And during his reign, the empire reached a level of military, political, and cultural power that would define the Ottoman image for centuries. Suleiman moved quickly. In 1521, Ottoman forces captured Belgrade, one of the key gateways into Central Europe. The following year, he targeted Rhodes. The island was controlled by the Knights Hospitaller, who had resisted Ottoman power in the eastern Mediterranean. After a long siege, Rhodes surrendered. But Suleiman's most dramatic victory came in 1526, Mohacs. The Hungarian army confronted the Ottomans on open ground. The battle lasted only a few hours. Hungarian forces were destroyed. King Louis II died while fleeing, and the medieval kingdom of Hungary entered a political catastrophe from which it would never recover in its old form. The road toward Vienna was opening. In 1529, Suleiman's army reached the Habsburg capital, Vienna. The siege has often been portrayed as the moment the Ottomans nearly conquered Europe. Reality was more complicated. The Ottoman army had marched enormous distances through difficult weather. Heavy artillery had been lost or delayed. Supplies were strained. Vienna's defenders resisted. The siege failed. Suleiman withdrew. But failure at Vienna did not mean Ottoman power had peaked. Across the Mediterranean, another struggle was unfolding. The Ottomans competed with Spain and its allies for control of strategic ports and sea routes. One of the most famous figures in that struggle was Hürrem Barbarossa. Under Barbarossa, Ottoman naval power expanded dramatically. In 1538, his fleet defeated a major Christian coalition at Preveza. For decades afterward, Ottoman influence across the eastern Mediterranean remained formidable. The empire now stretched across 3 continents, from Hungary and the Balkans, through Anatolia, into Syria, Egypt, and parts of Arabia, and across much of North Africa. But Suleiman's empire was not held together by soldiers alone. Constantinople, increasingly known in Ottoman usage as Istanbul, became one of the great capitals of the early modern world. At the center of its architectural transformation stood Mimar Sinan. Sinan designed mosques, bridges, schools, baths, aqueducts, and public buildings across the empire. His work helped create the monumental Ottoman visual language still associated with Istanbul today. Suleiman also became famous for law. Ottoman government operated through Islamic law alongside regulations issued by the Sultan. Suleiman systematized important parts of these imperial regulations, helping earn the title Kanuni. The empire depended on administration and a court capable of managing enormous differences between regions. Yet behind the image of order, another force was becoming increasingly important: the palace. And inside the palace stood one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history, Hürrem Sultan. European sources often called her Roxolana. Probably born in territory corresponding to modern Ukraine, she entered the imperial palace as an enslaved woman. Then she became Suleiman's favored consort. Hürrem accumulated wealth, influence, and political importance. She corresponded with foreign rulers and sponsored major charitable and architectural projects. Her rise also symbolized a broader transformation. Dynastic politics were increasingly moving inside the imperial household, and the stakes were enormous. Ottoman succession did not automatically pass peacefully from father to eldest son. Princes could compete for the throne, and competition could become lethal. Suleiman himself would experience this. His son Mustafa was popular with parts of the army and widely viewed as a possible successor. But in 1553, during a military campaign, Suleiman ordered Mustafa's execution. The prince was strangled. Whether Mustafa truly planned rebellion remains debated, but the result was unmistakable. Even at the height of Ottoman power, the dynasty lived with a brutal reality. The greatest threat to a sultan could come from his own family. Suleiman continued campaigning into old age. In 1566, he marched toward Hungary again. During the siege of Sigetvar, the 71-year-old sultan died. His death was initially concealed from the army. The empire he left behind was enormous. From the outside, it looked almost unstoppable, but the seeds of future instability were already inside the system. Succession, palace politics, military privilege, changing trade routes, powerful rivals, and institutions that had helped create Ottoman strength would gradually become harder to reform. The empire had reached extraordinary heights. Now came the far more difficult challenge. How do you preserve a system built for conquest when the world around it begins to change? When Suleiman died in 1566, the Ottoman Empire did not suddenly decline. That familiar story is too simple. The empire remained powerful for centuries. It could still raise enormous armies, collect vast revenues, control strategic trade routes, and defeat major European rivals. But something was changing. The world around the Ottomans was changing faster. Only 5 years after Suleiman's death came one of the most famous naval battles in history, Lepanto. In 1571, a Christian coalition known as the Holy League confronted the Ottoman fleet in the Gulf of Patras. The battle was enormous, hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of men, close combat across packed Mediterranean galleys. The Ottoman fleet suffered a devastating defeat. For Europe, Lepanto became a symbol. The Ottomans could be beaten, but strategically the victory was less decisive than the legend suggests. The Ottomans rebuilt much of their fleet with remarkable speed. The following year, they were again capable of major naval operations, and Ottoman power continued expanding elsewhere. This is why describing everything after Suleiman as decline creates a false picture. The empire was not collapsing, it was adapting, but adaptation was becoming harder. One problem came from the very institutions that had helped build Ottoman power. The Janissaries had begun as an elite force closely tied to the Sultan. Over time, they became more politically influential. Membership changed, privileges expanded. Janissaries became involved in commerce and urban life. And eventually, they could influence who sat on the throne. The protectors of the dynasty could become a threat to the dynasty. Then there was succession. Earlier, Ottoman princes had often governed provinces, gaining administrative experience while building political networks. But rival princes could also produce civil war. The dynasty developed a brutal solution, fratricide. A successful sultan could order the execution of his brothers to eliminate rival claims. Mehmed II had formally recognized the practice in imperial law. The logic was horrifying but clear. Kill a few members of the dynasty to prevent a civil war that might kill tens of thousands. Later, another system became common. Potential heirs were confined within the palace in an arrangement remembered as the kafes, the cage. Princes might spend years isolated from government before suddenly becoming sultan. It reduced some succession wars, but it could produce rulers with little experience of the world they were expected to govern. And the palace became increasingly important. Mothers of sultans, consorts, eunuchs, viziers, military factions, religious authorities, all could influence imperial politics. The period sometimes called the Sultanate of Women saw royal women such as Hürrem Sultan exercise extraordinary political influence. This was not simply evidence of decadence. Some of these women were highly capable political actors. The deeper issue was that Ottoman power was becoming distributed among institutions and factions whose interests did not always align. Meanwhile, the empire faced another transformation it could not control. The global economy. European maritime powers were developing routes around Africa and across the Atlantic. American silver flooded into global markets. Prices rose dramatically across Europe and the Ottoman world. Inflation damaged salaries and tax systems. Soldiers expected payment. Officials needed revenue. Provincial pressures increased. In Anatolia, major rebellions known as the Salali revolts destabilized large areas around the turn of the 17th century. Thousands died or were displaced. Villages were abandoned. The empire survived, again. That is one of the most remarkable features of Ottoman history. Crises that might have destroyed other states repeatedly failed to destroy this one, but survival had a cost. The Ottomans were increasingly fighting not only to expand, but to maintain the enormous system they had inherited. Then, in 1683, an Ottoman army appeared outside a city Suleiman had failed to capture more than 150 years earlier, Vienna. Once again, the empire stood before the Habsburg capital, and once again, Europe waited to see whether Vienna would fall. This time, the defeat would have consequences far greater than the first, because after 1683, the Ottoman frontier would begin moving in the opposite direction. In 1683, the Ottoman Empire returned to Vienna. The campaign was led by Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha. If Vienna fell, Ottoman influence in Central Europe could expand dramatically. But the siege dragged on, the defenders held, and a relief army approached. On September 12th, forces from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Holy Roman Empire attacked the Ottoman positions. Among them was the Polish king John III Sobieski. The Ottoman army was defeated. Vienna survived. Kara Mustafa retreated. Months later, he was executed on the Sultan's orders. But the real consequences were only beginning. The Habsburgs and their allies went on the offensive. The conflict became part of the Great Turkish War. Territories that the Ottomans had fought generations to acquire began slipping away. In 1699, the Treaty of Karlowitz confirmed major Ottoman territorial losses in Central Europe. This was a turning point, not because the empire suddenly became weak, it didn't, but because the strategic pattern had changed. For centuries, European powers had worried about Ottoman expansion. Now, Ottoman leaders increasingly had to worry about European expansion into Ottoman territory. Austria pressed from the northwest. Russia became increasingly dangerous around the Black Sea. And later, nationalist movements would challenge Ottoman control from inside the Balkans. The empire faced a new problem. How do you reform a system whose institutions believe reform threatens their survival? Some Ottoman rulers understood the danger. Sultan Selim III, who came to the throne in 1789, attempted military modernization. He created a new force trained along European lines. The reforms threatened established interests, especially the Janissaries. In 1807, Selim was deposed. He was later killed. The message was brutal. A sultan could recognize that the empire needed change and still be destroyed by the institutions he was trying to change. Then came Mehmed II. He understood the same problem, but he approached it differently. In 1826, Mehmed moved against the Janissaries. When they rebelled, forces loyal to the Sultan attacked their barracks with artillery. Thousands were killed, arrested, or executed. The Janissary Corps was abolished. The event became known as the Auspicious Incident. An institution that had helped create Ottoman military power nearly 5 centuries earlier was gone. Now reform accelerated. New military structures, government ministries, changes in clothing and administration, more centralized control. Later, the Tanzimat reforms, beginning in 1839, attempted to reorganize taxation, military service, law, education, and the relationship between the state and its subjects. Ottoman leaders were not simply watching Europe modernize while doing nothing. They were trying to rebuild the empire while living inside it. But reform created new tensions. Different groups wanted different futures. Some wanted stronger central government, others wanted local autonomy, some wanted constitutional government, others wanted stronger religious authority. European powers interfered constantly. Russia presented itself as a protector of Orthodox Christians. Britain and France sometimes supported the Ottomans because they feared Russian expansion more than they feared Ottoman power. That produced one of the strangest conflicts of the 19th century, the Crimean War. In 1853, Russia fought the Ottoman Empire. Britain and France entered the war on the Ottoman side. The same European powers that had once feared Ottoman conquest were now helping preserve the Ottoman state. Not because they loved the empire, because they needed the balance of power. The Ottomans survived the war, but dependence on European finance grew. Modernization was expensive. Railways, armies, infrastructure, administration, debt accumulated. In 1875, the Ottoman government effectively defaulted on much of its foreign debt. European creditors gained increasing influence over Ottoman finances. At the same time, nationalism was transforming the Balkans. Greek independence had already become a reality earlier in the century. Serbian autonomy expanded. Romanian independence followed. Bulgaria emerged. Ottoman territory in Europe contracted. European observers increasingly used a humiliating phrase for the empire, the sick man of Europe. But the phrase can mislead us. The empire was losing territory. It was also building railways, opening schools, reforming laws, expanding bureaucracy, and experimenting with constitutional government. It was not simply dying, it was fighting to reinvent itself. And that struggle produced one of the most controversial rulers in Ottoman history, Abdulhamid II. He would modernize parts of the empire, build an enormous surveillance state, suspend the constitution, and rule through a mixture of reform, religion, and fear. The empire was entering its final century, and the politics were about to become far more dangerous. In 1876, the Ottoman Empire did something remarkable. It adopted a constitution. For the first time, the empire would have an elected parliament and a constitutional framework limiting aspects of absolute rule. Then almost immediately, everything changed. War with Russia erupted in 1877. The Ottoman army suffered devastating defeats. Russian forces advanced dangerously close to Constantinople. Hundreds of thousands of people were displaced across the Balkans and Caucasus. The empire survived, but the political map changed dramatically. Serbia, Montenegro, and Romania gained internationally recognized independence. Bulgaria moved toward autonomy. Ottoman control in Europe continued shrinking, and Sultan Abdulhamid II suspended parliament. The constitution remained formally alive. Constitutional government did not. Abdulhamid ruled for the next 3 decades through an extraordinary combination of modernization and authoritarian control. Railways expanded, schools opened, telegraph lines connected distant provinces. The bureaucracy grew. The Hejaz Railway eventually linked Damascus with Medina, strengthening transportation and imperial authority. But Abdulhamid also created an extensive system of censorship and surveillance. Political opponents were monitored. Public criticism became dangerous. The Sultan increasingly emphasized his position as caliph, using Islamic identity as a source of unity across a multinational empire. But unity was becoming harder to maintain. Nationalism had transformed Ottoman politics. Greeks, Serbs, Bulgarians, and Romanians had already challenged imperial rule. Armenian political movements demanded reform and protection. Arab intellectual and political currents were developing. Albanians sought their own guarantees, and the empire responded differently in different places, sometimes with negotiation, sometimes reform, sometimes violence. In the 1890s, mass killings of Armenians during the Hamidian massacres left enormous numbers dead. The exact toll remains debated, but the scale of the violence is not. The empire's crisis was becoming more than territorial. It was becoming a crisis over what the Ottoman state actually was. A Muslim empire? A multinational monarchy? A constitutional state? A Turkish-centered nation? Different groups gave different answers. Then came the Young Turks. In 1908, officers and political activists associated with the Committee of Union and Progress forced Abdulhamid to restore the constitution. Crowds celebrated. Parliament returned. For a moment, constitutional government appeared capable of holding the empire together. It didn't. In 1909, after a counter-revolutionary crisis in Constantinople, Abdulhamid was deposed. His brother Mehmed V became sultan, but real political power increasingly shifted elsewhere. Then the empire began losing territory with astonishing speed. In 1911, Italy invaded Ottoman Libya. The Ottomans lost most of their North African territory. Then came the Balkan Wars. In 1912, Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Montenegro attacked the empire. Ottoman forces suffered catastrophic defeats. Cities and territories ruled from Constantinople for centuries were lost in months. The empire recovered some territory during the Second Balkan conflict, but the larger reality was unavoidable. By 1913, the Ottoman presence in Europe had been reduced dramatically. Millions of Muslims had already fled or been expelled from former Ottoman territories over decades of war and nationalist violence. Refugees poured into what remained of the empire. Trauma hardened politics, and inside the government, a more radical leadership emerged. In January 1913, members of the Committee of Union and Progress seized power in a coup. Three figures became especially influential: Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, Cemal Pasha. They inherited an empire that had lost territory, population, prestige, and strategic security. And they believed another major war was coming. They were right. In 1914, Europe exploded. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Russia mobilized. Germany entered. France entered. Britain entered. Within weeks, the continent was at war. The Ottoman leadership now faced a decision that would determine whether the empire survived: remain neutral or choose a side. They chose Germany. In late 1914, the Ottoman Empire entered World War I. It was a gamble. If the Central Powers won, the Ottomans might recover lost influence and escape Russian pressure. If they lost, there might be no empire left to save. After more than 600 years, the House of Osman was entering its final war. When the Ottoman Empire entered World War I, its leaders hoped the conflict might reverse decades of decline. Instead, the war would destroy the empire. The first major disaster came in the Caucasus. Enver Pasha launched an offensive against Russia during the winter of 1914 to 1915. At Sarıkamış, Ottoman soldiers fought not only the Russians, but extreme cold. Thousands died from combat, exposure, disease, and exhaustion. The campaign ended catastrophically. In 1915, Britain and France attempted to force the Dardanelles, threaten Constantinople, and potentially open a supply route to Russia. When the naval assault failed, Allied troops landed on the Gallipoli Peninsula. Among the commanders who emerged from the campaign was a young officer named Mustafa Kemal. The Allies eventually evacuated. Gallipoli became one of the Ottoman Empire's greatest victories. But winning one battlefield could not solve the empire's deeper crisis. World War I was consuming enormous numbers of men and resources. And in 1915, another catastrophe unfolded. The Ottoman government began the mass deportation of Armenians from large parts of the empire. Men were killed. Families were forced onto deportation routes. Women, children, and elderly people died through massacre, starvation, disease, and exposure. Large numbers were deliberately murdered. The destruction of the Ottoman Armenian population is recognized by many historians and countries as the Armenian genocide. Estimates vary, but roughly 1 million or more Armenians died. The modern Turkish state rejects the genocide designation, arguing that the deaths occurred within the broader violence and displacement of wartime collapse. The historical debate over terminology remains politically charged, but the scale of Armenian suffering and mass death is undeniable. And Armenians were not the only civilians caught in the empire's final violence. Assyrian and other Christian communities also suffered mass killing and displacement during the war. Meanwhile, another front opened in the Arab provinces. In 1916, the Arab Revolt began against Ottoman rule. Sharif Hussein of Mecca and forces associated with his family cooperated with Britain. The revolt did not single-handedly destroy Ottoman control in the Middle East, but it became part of a wider military collapse. British forces advanced from Egypt and Mesopotamia. Baghdad fell in 1917. Jerusalem fell later that year. Damascus followed in 1918. On October 30th, 1918, the Ottomans signed the Armistice of Mudros. The war was over, and the victors began dividing what remained. Allied forces occupied Constantinople. Plans were developed to partition Ottoman territories. Greek forces landed at Smyrna, modern Izmir, in 1919. For many Turks, the empire had not simply lost a war. The homeland itself now appeared threatened. Then Mustafa Kemal returned to the center of the story. The officer who had gained fame at Gallipoli became the leading figure in a Turkish nationalist movement based in Anatolia. A new war began, not to save the Ottoman Empire, but to build something after it. Nationalist forces fought Greek armies, challenged Allied occupation plans, and rejected the settlement imposed on the Ottoman government. By 1922, Mustafa Kemal's movement had won, and then came a decision that would have been almost unimaginable to Osman 6 centuries earlier. The Sultanate was abolished. The last Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed VI, left Constantinople aboard a British warship. In 1923, the Republic of Turkey was proclaimed. Mustafa Kemal became its first president. The Caliphate survived briefly. Then in 1924, it too was abolished. Members of the Ottoman dynasty were expelled. After more than 6 centuries, the Ottoman political order was gone. But empires do not disappear simply because a government ends. The Ottoman legacy remained across the Balkans, Turkey, the Middle East, and North Africa. Some remember Ottoman rule as an era of stability and coexistence. Others remember conquest, taxation, repression, and violence. Both kinds of memory can exist because 600 years cannot be reduced to one experience. The Ottoman Empire was not permanently rising, it was not permanently declining, and it was never simply the sick man of Europe. If you made it this far, you already know this isn't the kind of channel that's going anywhere. We put out something like this every single day, the version of the story that survives contact with the actual evidence. Subscribing keeps you in that loop. And if this one stayed with you, send it to 5 people who'd sit through something this long with you. Not everyone will. Some people do. Leave a comment, a real one. Tell me what part of this actually surprised you. And tell me what civilization, what forgotten site, what quiet piece of hidden history you want us to look at next. We'll be here tomorrow. Still digging?